Are ZK Rollups coming to Bitcoin, or is this all a bunch of hot air and misuse of this important cryptographic term? And for that matter, what in the heck are ZK Rollups in the first place? Today we discuss that and more. Let's jump in. I'm excited to share my company Joltz has partnered up with ThunderFunder to democratize investing in awesome Bitcoin startups. Now live on thunderfunder.com, where anyone can invest and own a real piece of Joltz. This video is made possible by Bitcoin trading cards, and I am pumped to have them as the first sponsor on my channel. I met Aladdin and the team back at Pacific Bitcoin 2022, and I'm not going to lie, at the time I thought, okay, cool, a quirky little Bitcoin project, but little could I have imagined at the time how this project would capture imaginations. I've personally used these to orange pill people that I care about in my life. The art is stunning and features Bitcoin artists all around the world. You get high quality Bitcoin education on topics like economics and freedom as part of that, which makes this, as you can imagine, a really special project for me. And I'm not gonna lie, it makes you want to collect these. The community behind this is also truly insane. And I think they have a real shot at bringing Bitcoin to the mainstream. So if you're curious to check them out, head over to btc-tc.com where you can find the different series they've launched. And hey, if you do end up snagging some cards, you'll also get some Bitcoin rewards back on your purchase, powered by Joltz. Here's to ripping packs and stacking sats. Okay, so in today's video, we're going to break down all of the different terminology and a little bit of the history into how we got here, which I think is very important. But to start off with some motivation, why is the rest of this video and this discussion in general relevant or important in the first place? Well, what are the problems that we are trying to solve? One of those problems is a problem that any blockchain, including Bitcoin, will face, and that is the challenge around scaling. Right? Blockchains do not scale. We have learned that. And yet some blockchains continue to persist in this quest to build the sort of ultimate L1 where everything you just plop it all on and all the computation and verification all happens on chain. That's fine if you have no care towards decentralization and verification costs, i.e. the cost of being able to run a full node. But that's obviously not Bitcoin. And while the Lightning Network is an incredibly powerful mechanism for scaling Bitcoin payments, it's also not the silver bullet. And furthermore, both Lightning and the base layer of Bitcoin are limited by Bitcoin's limited scripting language, right? The number of things, programmability, expressivity, these are all the sort of terms you'll hear. And what people are talking about there is that we are confined to a select list of operations that we can do using Bitcoin script. And so, while I think the term DeFi is pretty besmirched at this point, I do think there's a very real and important quest underneath what is often a lot of speculation there, right? The ability to do more than just hodl my Bitcoin, which is great, spend my Bitcoin, which is great, but to be able to engage in more sophisticated financial transactions in a self-sovereign way, like, I think that's important, right? And I think a lot of people would agree. But even if you're like, nah, I'm just hodling forever, like, I genuinely don't care, I think there's also a broader importance to this as well. And that is nicely articulated in this piece, Endgame Money, which is from Strata. We will talk about Strata as an example of one of the projects that is building some of this technology as we speak. But I really like this passage here, which says ZK proofs, and again, we'll break down what all that means, create an asymmetric dynamic where the burden falls on large centralized entities to prove their integrity. No longer can the powerful hide behind walls of complexity. With ZK proofs posted on Bitcoin, anyone with any digital device can verify the integrity of another actor. This is genuine decentralization. Strata marks the dawn of a new era, one where we no longer hope Bitcoin service providers aren't evil, but one where we cryptographically verify they cannot be so. So that's an important idea, right? Even if you don't care about the additional programmability, I think there is still something to be said here. And so there is an argument that Bitcoin's limited script leads to a tendency for Bitcoin supply to go into the hands of, big centralized custodians where I can then do, all this other stuff. And then we're left to question, is Coinbase selling fake coins and like all this other nonsense? So ZK Rollups can touch on a lot of different things, right? It touches on scalability. It also touches on privacy, as we will discuss. But let's break apart the terminology and technology a little bit more. And so at the very root of all this is a proof. Think of like math class, right? You have this idea of proofs wherein you could demonstrate either through axiomatic or self-evident facts plus logic that kind of something was true, right? And so there's also a concept of proofs when it comes to cryptography. How can I kind of prove that something is true or has integrity or is valid in some way, shape, or form, or conforms to some set of rules, etc. And so like Bitcoin, all of this stretches back decades, right? All the kind of cryptographic researchers and practitioners that have come over the years. And you started out with this idea of interactive proofs. Think of it like a game show analogy, right? There's like a game show host who's the verifier, right? They know the answer to the question they're going to ask. And they're asking you, the prover, questions to see whether you can get to the answer or some secret information that we're looking to know. And so there's some sort of back and forth dialogue happening here, some sort of interactivity by which that verifier can determine if I, the prover, actually have this knowledge that I'm trying to prove that I have. Then came along snarks, or succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge, which we were able to make all sorts of improvements, like reducing the size of the proof, eliminating the need for that interaction, that sort of back and forth, and you can just sort of do it in one fell swoop. I post this proof, and you can mathematically determine that it is indeed true. As an aside, you may also have heard of Starks, which were an invention from Starkware, and that stands for Scalable Transparent Arguments of Knowledge, which purport to have some advantages over snarks, but that's outside the scope of this video. And then finally, we can get to ZK snarks, which is what a lot of people are often referring to when they say zero knowledge proofs. And this basically shields the inputs of that computation, right? So you don't necessarily know the information about maybe a user and their transaction that went into that proof, but you can nonetheless verify its integrity. So it really is in many ways like magic. This was originally used in Zcash, the privacy-focused cryptocurrency. And then finally, that gets us to ZK Rollups. It's bringing those ZK proofs, ZK snarks. Again, a lot of these terms are used interchangeably, and using that in the context of a rollup, which begs the question, what is a rollup? And so this explanation is in the context of Ethereum, where rollups were really, in many ways, pioneered. And you can see they're talking about validity rollups, which is perhaps a more generalized term, right? Like ZK rollups are a special type of validity rollup in which you're using zero knowledge proofs as opposed to just validity proofs. But as you can see, there's three main steps, right? You have a bunch of transactions that can be executed completely off-chain, right? So in a not dissimilar way as to how you have Lightning transactions happening off-chain, it's a somewhat similar concept, although, Lightning has its own kind of unique architecture to it. But then what you're doing is you're batching all of these transactions together, right? That didn't need to happen on the base layer. And then what's happening is you're generating this proof, and it is a cryptographic assurance that whatever state change is being proposed by this rollup, okay, now these addresses have this amount of, these assets, blah, 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 blah. Here is the new state of the chain, as it were. You can verify based on this proof that that rollup is indeed the result of properly executed transactions. And the goal is, of course, to make that as easy to verify as possible, because that verification has to be done on chain. And so what's literally getting written to the chain, in this case, in Ethereum, is the proof. Like the proof is getting written to the chain along with a succinct bit of data that comprises essentially a summary of like all the things that were done. And then in this case, Ethereum nodes would verify those proofs and everything gets settled. So pretty interesting. You can enable users to do whatever arbitrary transactions and computation off-chain, and then in a very succinct way, have that activity verified, codified, and settled on-chain. Like, make no mistake, this is an essential ingredient to scaling Bitcoin. This too is likely also not a silver bullet, as I commented earlier on the Lightning Network, but like, this is an important ingredient. And so what's the problem? Why don't we have this yet? Well, it is because this technology is not fully natively available on Bitcoin yet. For one, you would need at least some sort of soft fork to introduce new opcodes that enable the verification of these proofs, ZK proofs, validity proofs, whatever. So that's one thing. But for those of you that saw some of the buzz around BitVM, and I covered that a little bit earlier this year, but BitVM is what we call an optimistic protocol. So instead of the kind of validity ZK proofs, like, those types of proofs are essentially a mathematical guarantee that what data I'm representing indeed has integrity, whereas an optimistic protocol or rollup or proof or what have you, we're basically assuming that the transactions are valid. However, a challenger can post a fraud proof to prove that, hey, actually something you have submitted is in fact invalid. So like, holy grail would be to have the ability to verify full-blown ZK proofs on Bitcoin. This would be the sort of most trust minimized way that we can do these different things. But until that point, BitVM and BitVM2 and some of the other efforts of which we will discuss now do hold a lot of promise, at least in the interim. And so next, I want to just highlight a couple projects that are working in this space. I'm not going to do kind of individual deep dives on them. I will likely do that in future videos. So if any of this technology is very interesting to you, be sure you're subscribed, because as these different projects continue to develop their solutions, I think there will be more practical ways for us to kind of get our hands on some of this stuff. But for today, I want to at least tee some of these projects up and highlight a bit about what they're doing. Citrea here bills itself as Bitcoin's first ZK rollup. Again, we will discuss why that's not precisely true if we're taking the precise definition of a ZK rollup, but it's nonetheless very interesting. We can see some of the highlights in its design here. It uses this BitVM-based Clementine as this sort of bridge design. So Citrea is what's being used as this execution layer, and then you have the settlement happening on the base layer of Bitcoin. We can come back to the top and go to some of their documentation, and maybe we can go to the TLDR here. And so as we can see, it is a Type 2 ZK EVM. Citrea proofs are inscribed in Bitcoin and optimistically verified via BitVM. So that was, what we were just discussing in terms of BitVM's potential there. And Citrea has built a system around that. Citrea appears to use Starks, and it has this trust minimize. Again, that's always a loaded term to a peg mechanism. You can see a deeper technical introduction here for those of you that might be interested. I will include some of these links in the description down below. But importantly, Citrea inherits some of these critical characteristics of Bitcoin, full Bitcoin L1 security, given that it uses Bitcoin for data availability. You get censorship resistance, reorg resistance, all that good stuff, and so on and so forth. So Citrea, very interesting. Definitely one of the early projects pioneering in this space. You also now have Strata, which is from Alpin Labs, and they've put out their concept of endgame money. We can go to their docs as well. Now, Strata was just recently announced, but I imagine they've been working on this for some time, as Citrea has as well. And interestingly, in this case, this is using the term validity rollup, right? Which should be stronger than that kind of optimistic paradigm that you get with BitVM. And again, you're going to see all of these guys are like, they're EVM compatible. They're using some sort of Ethereum execution client. How Strata works, we could get a little bit more on the system architecture. The Bitcoin bridge is going to be important. So again, I'll put some of these documentation links in the notes below as well. And then finally, I wanted to highlight BitcoinOS. This is, I believe, from the builders behind Sovereign, the sort of Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem built on top of the Rootstock sidechain. But back in the summer at block height 853626, the BitcoinOS project verified the first ZK proof on Bitcoin without forking its code, which is very, very interesting. So you can go to their GitHub, and they're using this thing called BitSnark, and you can get some more information there if you are so curious. It's a method of verifying zero-knowledge proofs on the Bitcoin network. Very, very interesting. I admittedly haven't read the white paper on this just yet, but you can see some of the highlights here as well, right? You know, it's using this BitSnark where you have this roll-up where you can pay, you know, quote-unquote gas fees, execution fees in Bitcoin. You get all the security inherited from Bitcoin, L1, similar to Citrea and Strata. Trustless bridging. So you can see kind of the traits and properties that all of these projects are kind of claiming to have. Programmable tokens, trustless bridging, all this sort of stuff. So definitely warrants some further investigation from my end. With that being said, as I alluded to earlier, semantics does matter. And this excellent post from Giannis here is really important, even if it is semantic in nature, right? So Chainway, which is behind Citrea, and then Alpin, which is behind Strata, are both kind of making these claims of, hey, we've got ZK Rollups on Bitcoin. And so he's essentially saying, well, what is the nature of this proof, right? So he goes into some detail here, and ultimately the conclusion for why you could kind of poke holes a little bit in the terminology here is, you know, Citrea and Strata will use an optimistic validating bridge, which again wasn't totally clear from Strata's documentation, but in any case, to the degree that that is true, then yes, that is not, you know, precisely a ZK rollup, and the rollup's relationship with Bitcoin as an execution layer for Bitcoin-backed assets is optimistic, and so his claim is calling these systems sovereign ZK rollups that use Bitcoin for data availability with an optimistic bridge for Bitcoin assets is correct. Contending that to a ZK rollup on Bitcoin or Bitcoin ZK rollup is a stretch. But conclusion, which I agree with, semantics aside, these are cool technologies I'm bullish on. They're also some of the most Bitcoin-aligned systems being developed. That is absolutely true. And he will acknowledge that, you know, for example, Citrea does say in their very own documentation that to get to a truly trustless validating bridge, you would need a soft fork, which I alluded to earlier in the video. And you will see here Orkin, who is the main lead of Citrea, CEO, whatever, I don't know what their structure is, says, welcome to my world, friend, semantics is fun. So in any case, my goal there was not to sort of pull you through the muck and minutia of semantics, but I do think it matters, especially when different projects are making marketing claims. And I don't think any of these projects are doing it maliciously, but that nuance does matter, and it is important for us to understand where we are today and what, in terms of what's possible on Bitcoin and what may be possible in the future. And as a user of any of these systems, I think it's important to know what are my trust assumptions, right? And it's certainly not trustless with what exists today yet. But I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on any of this? Do you want to see future content on this type of technology as it develops in the future? Are there other projects you're aware of that you would like to see content on in the future? Let me know in the comments down below. But I hope you at least found this valuable and insightful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like. Use the share feature underneath this video. That really does help get this to a broader audience. And if you are so enamored with this content, you want to donate to a pleb, which really does help me continue to make these videos, you can do so in a number of ways. There's the YouTube Super Thanks feature built directly into YouTube. Or, my preference, if you want to send some sats my way on the Lightning Network, you can send to my Lightning address, ragermajor@getalby.com. And for those of you that want to get in touch with me, I'm now working with a number of clients one-on-one on all sorts of different Bitcoin-related topics, from taking self-custody, creating a multi-sig, running a Bitcoin node, privacy best practices, and more. You can reach out to me on Vida at vida.io/IanMajor. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave things here. As a reminder, every sat counts. And until next time, my friends, I'll see you then.